What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 4 Daily Matchup Edition here on DraftKings, DKTV. I'm David Socrdave, joined by Andrew Wiggins. You might know him as Makisupa, Drew Dinkmeyer, the guy that is in all the commercials, Dinkpiece, and Adam Levitan. Adam, one of the DraftKings analysts and the host of the Daily Fantasy Edge podcast. Did I get that right, Adam?
I think Daily Fantasy Football Edge podcast, and you didn't have enough emphasis on the Daily Fantasy Football Edge podcast.
I know. I'm still getting used to the whole Ohio State thing, but I will get used to it. But guys, we got Week 4 after a high scoring Week 3, and Week 4 I feel like is a little bit different with roster construction. Drew.
Yeah, I think this will be an interesting week because, last week we just had so many different running back options available to us. We had high-end running backs, we had mid-price running backs, we had cheap running backs that emerged during the course of the week. And I think this week it's a little bit more condensed at the running back position, which makes your roster construction choices a little bit different.
All right, let's get into tonight's game, the Thursday night game. We have a few cheap options in this, Adam, and a couple expensive options. So I'll let you start with just how you see this game going down.
Yeah, I think if you're playing Thursday slate, Le'Veon Bell is going to be very popular, and with good reason, because like Drew alluded to, a lot of the other top-end running backs are not in great spots. I don't really love the spot for Eddie Lacy. Marshawn Lynch is questionable. Adrian Peterson has a very difficult spot at Denver. So I think Le'Veon Bell is a safe projection with Vic in there for 25 plus touches. Well worth his price tag. I think I would be more concerned about using Antonio Brown just because we don't know exactly how Michael Vick is going to perform in this offense. It was not pretty when Vic got in there last week. Vic is at this stage of his career more of a game manager than anything else. I think we saw how the Jets used him last year as really just a caretaker of the offense. So for the expensive guys, I'd much prefer to go Le'Veon Bell over Antonio Brown. And then there's some cheap guys like Max Williams and those guys. I'm not sure if you guys are on Max or not.
Yeah, Max at 2.5K, Andrew. You were the Barnage whisperer last week, so I'm going to ask you, are you on Max Williams this week?
I think he's a fine play. I'm probably not going to play him, but to be honest, there's not a ton to like at tight end this week. At least there's not a bunch jumping out at me. So if you want to go cheap there, that's fine. I think there's some savings that you can find at other positions. You don't really need to go cheap there. The guy I like a lot tonight is Steve Smith. The only slight concern being that he's on short. He's looked like vintage Steve Smith so far. He's averaging over 13 targets a game. It's a good matchup. I mean, really everything is in his favor tonight.
I am shocked that you like Steve Smith. I will be shocked if Drew says he likes him.
I'm not typically the biggest Steve Smith guy, but I do think this is a good spot for Smith. He's not one of my primary targets at wide receiver, but I wouldn't argue anybody using him in cash games or tournaments. I think he's shown both a high floor and a high ceiling with the way he's performed. I do like Max Williams, 8 targets last week when Crockett Gilmore got hurt in the first half. And that tight end position has historically, through the first 3 weeks of the season at least, been the second targeted position for the Baltimore offense. So I think you could get, another 8, maybe even 10 targets from a 2,500 tight end. I think that's really intriguing. And I think that's one of the ways that if you're going to pay up for Le'Veon Bell, that you can get some of that salary relief to be able to still churn out a pretty good roster. So that's kind of how I'm looking at tonight's slate. The 3 guys I'm considering are Le'Veon, Max, and Steve Smith.
Yeah, and Max Williams, a rookie this year. You saw his athleticism last year, especially if you played college football DFS for Minnesota. That one leap hurdle that he had, taking it to the house, was one of the highlights of the year. He's an athletic guy, 2.5K. No Gronk this week means that you're not really spending up on tight end. With the exception of Jimmy Graham, which still is not that – he's still not that heavily priced. With DraftKings, they have kind of deflated the tight end salaries, it feels like, this year. So, I'm fine with using Max Williams. Usually we say a Thursday night game, like, just avoid it and late swap to whoever you want to, especially in cash games. But tonight feels like you have to have some exposure to this game if you're playing the Thursday night slate. So – yeah. Let's move on, though. Jets at Miami. We'll have we'll we'll just skip this because it's not even in like the main slate. So we're just going to skip it. Jacksonville at Indy. And this game is going to be interesting with the receivers. You've got Dante Moncrief, who salvaged a mediocre day last Sunday against the Titans with a fourth quarter touchdown catch, but he is getting a lot of the snaps, Adam.
Yeah, and he was up around like 20-something%. I was just trying to look. I think 20-something% owned in the Millie Maker last week. People did get the touchdown. We did get the touchdown from him, but I think that his ownership will come down a bit because he only got 13.4 DraftKings points. But now you could say that the spot is even better, and his role hasn't really changed at all. He's still widened the gap between himself and Andre Johnson in terms of snap counts and routes run. Last week, I think he'll continue to widen that gap, and I think the spot is even better just because he's home and the secondaries of Jacksonville and Tennessee are equally burnable. So if last week was supposed to be the alleged eruption for Andrew Luck, if you still believe that the eruption is coming this week, should be the real eruption for Andrew Luck.
And Drew, you've been pretty vocal on Andrew Luck's performance this year and career performance. So your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I think it is a good spot for Indy's offense to get back on track. They've got like an implied team total up over 28 points, about the second highest on the week, along with Green Bay. You know, at home is always a good situation for NFL players. And then you've got, kind of Moncrief and T.Y. Hilton on that fast turf. Are two guys that can kind of burn these Jacksonville corners. So I think the interesting thing is, as Moncrief separated himself from Andre Johnson, how close he is to T.Y. Hilton. They're playing about the same amount of snaps. Moncrief's had 15 targets the last 2 weeks, while Hilton's had 14. Those two guys have kind of emerged as the top guys in the passing game. So I'm interested in both those guys along with Luck. And I don't mind Gore. Pretty good price tag on Gore, 4,700. Figures to be playing from ahead as a home favorite here, and has been getting the bulk of the red zone looks for them so far.
What about the tight end situation, Andrew?
Yeah, I don't know what the story is on Dwayne Allen, but if he does miss again, Fleener, I think, had 7 targets last week, so he was at least involved. A lot of people were on the Colts last week, but if you looked at it, it maybe wasn't as good a spot as it was sold. They were on the road. Their team total, I think, was around 25. Like Drew said, they're up at 20 this week. They're back at home. This seems like the better spot for them really to bounce back. And they did score 35 points last week, but Luck threw a few touchdowns, and Tennessee had the ball for most of the game. I think going into the fourth quarter, they had the ball for twice as long as Indy. So they didn't have the opportunity to run as many plays. They got some in late. But it seems like a really good spot for all of them. And then one sneaky play on the Jacksonville side, I think, is Allen Hurns. You're going to have Vontae Davis on Allen Robinson, so he might get a few more looks. And he did have, I think, like a 60 or 70-yard touchdown last week. So he's got the big playability.
And the cheaper of the two as far as A-Rob. A-Rob burned a lot of people, this guy included, last week. So I will not be going back to that well. Let's move on. The Giants at Buffalo, and this game is just like oozing. It's oozing, Adam, with like fantasy goodness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Carlos Williams at 3,400 is almost impossible to pass up. I'm curious what you guys think. I mean, obviously, Carlos Williams is a projection of 16 to 20 touches, I would say, with LaShawn McCoy. Almost certainly out against a Giants defense that lacks talent, has been playing over their head, I think. But I would say Carlos Williams is going to be in 100% of most people's cash games lineups. But what do we do with Carlos Williams at 3,400 in tournaments? Do we play him or do we try to fade him? Because I would say he's going to be like 45% owned.
Drew?
Yeah, I'm thinking if he's going to be around 45, 50% owned, I'm thinking of taking an underweight position in big GPPs and big tournaments. And I think there's a couple of ways that you can do that could be fun. One, you can just play Tyrod instead and hope that Tyrod kind of gets all the fantasy goodness and leaves Carlos behind. And that's an easy way to get some leverage on that situation. And then I also think you can just build your roster differently. Like by not taking Carlos Williams, you're going to force yourself into different positions. And so you're going to have the leverage of not owning a really highly owned player in Carlos Williams, but probably it's going to force you in some directions that also forces you into some low owned players as well that just aren't owned because that's not the way people are constructing, as opposed to they don't have a good matchup. So I think in tournaments, I'll probably end up taking an underweight position as long as no other news breaks that that starts to spread out that cheap running back ownership. Like last week, we thought Bilal Powell was going to be the guy. Then the news broke on DeMarco Murray, allowing you to have Sproles or Ryan Matthews, and that started to spread out ownership amongst those cheap guys. If that happens again, I'll probably take an overweight position on Carlos Williams because I think that ownership will start to get spread out.
Yeah, and just to clarify, when Drew says underweight or overweight, it's not like Socrdave is overweight. It's as far as like having more of your percentage of lineups in the Millionaire Maker that is more than the ownership percentage. So if he has 100 lineups in there and his ownership was 45%, underweight would be like 25 lineups with Carlos Williams. But then again, I think that also depends on there are tons of different strategies for the Millionaire Maker. We've seen, it seems like every week we've seen different one win. And also depends on if you have 1, 2, or 10 lineups to put in. So if you have one lineup to put in, I think you're wanting to cash, like you're wanting to make a profit off of that lineup. So you're going to put Carlos Williams in. If you have 10 or 20, yeah, you're going to have some lineups that you don't have in there. Sammy Watkins probably won't play in this game. No Shady McCoy. So he's going to get a lot of touches. Another guy is Charles Clay. And you know, at the tight end position might be a decent spot, Andrew.
Yeah, I like how you're kicking all the tight end questions.
I know it's not on purpose. I'll switch it up. I promise.
Gary Barnage, ladies and gentlemen.
This is what you get.
I really like Charles Clay a lot this week. He's probably one of the guys I'll be considering the most. The biggest concern I'll have is potentially having too much exposure to the Buffalo offense. Carlos Williams in tournaments, it's one of those things where he's going to be getting so many touches and he's so cheap that I'm probably not going to sweat his ownership too much. But I like Drew's take on Tyrod. It might pull back the ownership on Tyrod, who's a fantastic play himself, and Dalton's at the same price. So I think people might play more Dalton, and Tyrod could just be in a spot because of Carlos Williams and Dalton, where even though everything's seemingly in his favor, he goes a little bit under-owned.
All right. So I'll stay.
One more thing about this. I wouldn't say necessarily to target them for GPPs, but no one is trying to run on Buffalo because it's really difficult. So you're going to get some more volume out of Eli and Beckham, and they're capable of going off at any time. I mean, the Patriots are on another level right now, but they put up some serious points on Buffalo. So I do think that they're an interesting play in a really big tournament like the Millie Maker.
All right, and I was going to kick to you the Giants offense, so I'm glad that you went ahead and took that. If it's like the Barnage call last week where you made a special point to have something to say, then people should probably pay attention to this.
I thought we might just skip right over him.
All right, Carolina at Tampa Bay, and Andrew, your thoughts on Olsen this week?
I mean, you gotta like him. Yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm not. I'm going to give the tight end position to somebody else.
I only will answer questions about tight ends.
Drew, your thoughts on this game? Like, no one from Tampa Bay is standing out, but it seems like Carolina, with Cam Newton's performance last week, Greg Olsen's performance last week, and Jonathan Stewart's lack of performance last week, might be in play for this week.
Yeah, I still like Cam and Olsen. The challenge is, you know, as the price tags kind of move up, you lose a little bit of opportunity because this offense isn't super explosive. It isn't high volume in terms of the number of plays they run, so price matters so much. But I do like Cam. I've got him as a top 5 quarterback option this week. I think the price tag is still reasonable there. Olsen, a little bit more expensive, but given the lack of depth at the tight end position this week in general and the lack of high-end options, I think he's very playable against a Lovie Smith defense that historically has played a lot of cover 2 and a lot of cover 3, which really tries to limit big plays. And if you look at the receivers that Carolina has, those guys are guys that really stretch the field, Ted Ginn, Philly Brown. So if they're stretching the field and Tampa Bay is taking that away, I think that leaves a lot of Olsen over the middle. So I think he's probably going to be the most heavily targeted tight end, and I think he's got a very safe floor. But those are the two guys I'm mainly focusing on. I like the Panthers defense because I like taking defenses against Jameis, but on the road, there's so many other good defenses at home that they're falling a little bit down in my ranks this week.
Yeah, and let's not forget like just how heavily targeted Olsen has been these past 2 weeks. He actually had another touchdown taken away in Sunday's game, and the very next play, they went right back to him for the score. So it's he's getting a lot of targets, and like you said, Drew, I think he has a safe floor. We'll go ahead and move past this, unless anybody wants to say anything about Tampa Bay this week. Okay, that's all.
The one thing I'll say about Tampa Bay is I don't think this is the week, but Mike Evans had 17 targets last week. I think that's a really good sign. But Josh Norman is legit, and I wouldn't mess around with it this week.
All right. Philly at Washington, and there's definitely some uncertainty around this game, Andrew.
Yeah, so there's we were talking about this yesterday. I was like, I don't understand how they can predict 30-mile-an-hour winds. And Drew's like, well, there's a hurricane that'll be rolling through. Yeah, yes. I now understand how they can do that. So there's some concern about the game being played. It's possible that it could be so bad that the game gets canceled or postponed. And it's also possible that maybe there's just some light rain. I think no matter what, there's probably going to be some rain and some weather concerns. But really what we're concerned about is if there's going to be wind, because rain doesn't tend to impact the play too much, but wind will. Once you get the wind over 15 miles an hour, it starts to negatively impact the passing game, which is a shame because Jordan Reed is probably my top play. Again, sticking with the tight end theme for you guys, but he's been so heavily targeted, about 9 targets a game, and he's been doing stuff with – he stands out. If the weather is bad, he's a guy that maybe he'll be okay because he's running more routes and some maybe that him. But it's probably be a little apprehensive to play him if the weather's going to be nasty. So something I'm going to keep an eye on, and probably avoiding most of the other players in the game because of that reason.
Yeah, and you've seen Vegas already move their line like 2 to 2.5 points down on this total. I was all on Jordan Reed as well, but we don't know what they're going to do. And Andrew, you mentioned offline that it's possible, like they both have the same bye weeks. So, as far as like we don't know the protocol, what they're going to do. Last year we had Drew, the Bills game that was moved to Ford Field.
Yep.
On Monday night when Sammy Watkins,
the Sammy Watkins death train night,
did nothing. So yeah, we don't know the protocol. So we'll go ahead and skip past this. Other than saying that if they do play and it's postponed or played in another stadium, then Jordan Reed is definitely a legit option. Oakland at Chicago.
The other thing I just pipe in about that is it's great at DraftKings with late swap that you can enter Thursday contests and evaluate that game on Sunday, that we don't have to make that decision now.
Yeah.
Company manager.
Ding. All right. Adam, Oakland at Chicago. And as far as this game, it's a matter of like last week I faded Latavius Murray because it's just Raiders on the road. I didn't want to do it, and that was a mistake. This week you've got a bunch of different Raiders at Chicago. What are you doing about this game?
Yeah, I think the Bears are going to show up in this game. I would not surprise me at all if the Bears actually won this game. I mean, everybody is talking about how bad the Bears are, and everybody's talking about how good the Raiders are. The Raiders are on back-to-back road games. That doesn't mean that they can't put up fantasy stats. I think Amari Cooper is a really, really good play. Seen 9, 11, and 11 targets in his first 3 games. Obviously, the apple of Derek Carr's eye, and Derek Carr is a pretty aggressive passer. Against Allen Ball and Fuller and these guys, it should not be a problem for Amari Cooper to go nuts. I also think Crabtree, like let's say Amari Cooper's ownership is going to be 25. I think Crabtree projects for a similar amount of targets, but he is way cheaper and he'll be way, way, way less owned. Now, Michael Crabtree is not nearly as explosive as Amari Cooper, but I still think that he is an interesting tournament play just to kind of leverage off all the ownership that's going to be on Amari Cooper. If the Bears are going to play well, it's like, how are they going to do it? I think they're going to do it with Martellus Bennett. I think they're going to do it with Matt Forte, and nobody's going to be paying up for Matt Forte because everybody assumes that the Bears are the worst team in the league, and maybe they are, but I still think that as only a 3-point dog, that they can show up in this spot, and I think Matt Forte is a really, really interesting tournament play as a guy that's going to project for close to 25, 30 touches.
Yeah, and maybe Latavius is a guy that if you're playing in tournaments instead of Carlos Williams, but kind of the same theme, Drew, as far as trying to figure out what this offense, like the Bills, like what this offense is going to be. You've got the DVOA metric saying the Bears are last in defense, but then you have Vegas not projecting a lot of points. It could be just that they're on the road. Your thoughts on this Raiders offense?
Yeah, I like it from a DFS perspective because it's really condensed, and I like tight offenses that don't spread the ball around a lot for fantasy purposes. And in this Raiders offense, you've got Latavius Murray basically getting almost all of the carries. You've got him getting a ton of red zone work. You've got Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree getting almost all of the targets. They've both got big market shares of targets. And you've got Derek Carr, flinging it a lot. And they're all pretty cheap relative to their skill sets and relative to their market shares and relative to this matchup. So I think all four of those guys are playable. Obviously, you probably want to manage how much exposure you have to them each in one lineup, simply because, as you alluded to, the Vegas implied totals for Oakland is around 23, 24 points. It's not huge. It's not way up there, but that is a solid road total. And I do think the Bears defense is weak on the whole. I also like Adam's point on Forte. I think the one thing that makes me a little bit concerned about Forte was the fact that they didn't use him at all in the passing game last week, because that's so vital to his opportunity. But I do think these linebackers for the Raiders are terrible in coverage, and we've seen tight ends eat them up all season long. I think it's a good spot for them to attack with Forte and Bennett.
Andrew, I think there you go. As far
my dog's back here growling, trying to get me to wrestle with him, and he's got his phone, and so yeah, I've been telling him to shut up, but unfortunately, he doesn't speak English.
All right,
gotta throw him a bone every once in a while.
Well, he has a bone. He wants me to come try and take it from him.
Speaking of throwing a bone, Latavius Murray, 11 targets, has caught all 11 balls on those targets. So I feel like Drew, you said Forte was not, we don't know how they're going to use him. We have a fairly good idea, Andrew, of how they're going to use Latavius Murray.
Yeah, I mean, he's getting all the touches, and they're using him heavily in the red zone. There's so much to like, and the 24 team total is like a little bit lower than you'd want, but they are on the road. And the thing about all these guys is they're cheap. Carr, Murray, Crabtree, and Cooper are all like reasonably priced players. So it's not like you're spending some huge amount to get them. So I think it's okay that they're not projected to score 28 points, because the teams that are, you're paying a lot more for those players. So I like all of them. It's kind of a similar situation to Buffalo, where they're all great plays, and I don't want to get too heavy on one offense because they could have a bad day, and you don't want that to sink your whole cash game lineup. But some stuff to really like in tournaments there.
All right, so let's play a game. Murray or Cooper, if you had to choose one this week. Drew?
I'm on Murray over Cooper, but I think I'm in the minority.
Adam?
Yeah, I think Cooper, just because I think that the Raiders are a good bet to be playing from behind in this game. Not that that buries Latavius at all, like we talked about, but still.
Andrew?
Well, I'd say Murray mostly because I think I like Cooper, but there are a few other receivers right at that price point that I think are quite comparable, whereas Murray's kind of at his own price point as far as what I'm expecting for the production that he's going to give. So, and there's just more receivers I like than running backs this week, so I'm going to go Murray.
Same thought process as you, Andrew. I like Cooper as a guy with a much higher ceiling in this game compared. I mean, he's had record-setting performance for a rookie the first 3 weeks, and he hasn't even caught a touchdown yet, I don't think, or in the red zone. So as far as that goes, like, he has a high ceiling, but I feel like there are plenty of wide receivers this week. I don't feel like there are plenty. This feels like week 2 again, as far as the running back situation goes. So it's 3-1 Murray. So there we go. Let's move on to Houston at Atlanta. And the big question mark in this game, Adam, is Arian Foster going to play? And they have a short week coming up after this week with a Thursday night game.
Yeah, I'd be a little surprised if he played. I mean, he's only 2 months removed from surgery to reattach a groin muscle to his bone. I mean, not only is it disgusting, but it sounds very painful. So 2 months removed from that, and with a Thursday game coming up, and with Alfred Blue playing reasonably well, I don't see a reason to rush Arian Foster back. And if they do, I wouldn't even expect a full workload. So I'm surprised I'm hearing a lot of people talk about Arian Foster when he still costs $7,000. It's not like his price dropped at all. He's still up at $7,000. So Arian Foster is not a play for me this week at all.
Yeah, and Alfred Blue, 3.9K on DraftKings. Could be one of those leverage plays in the tournament instead of Carlos Williams, like we talked about. But still a solid play. And DeAndre, if not for like all the wide receivers just going nuts last week, DeAndre Hopkins would have been more of a story. But he's kind of been unnoticed with an incredible start to the season, Adam.
I love DeAndre Hopkins. Yeah, I thought, in week 2, he got Josh Norman, meaning, he still got the targets, did not get the production. But when he hasn't been dealing with Josh Norman this year, he's been incredible. And I think Ryan Mallett knows Nate Washington and Cecil Shorts are well below average receivers, and DeAndre Hopkins is well above average. We should also say the Texans are getting 80 offensive plays off per game, which is just an outrageous number. Like the Eagles led the league last year with 70. The Texans were at 66 last year. Mike Clay pointed all this out in his column this week. So I expect some regression at some point for how fast Houston is playing, which could limit DeAndre Hopkins' opportunity. I'm not sure it's going to happen this week, given how many points they'll need to score to keep up with Julio and the Falcons.
What do you think about Trufant this week covering Hopkins? Because I know the Norman thing in week 2 was a concern. And do you have that same kind of concern with Trufant?
Yeah, they haven't used Trufant really to trail everybody this year. They might do it with Hopkins. I mean, if you're going to shadow anybody, it's this Houston offense because they only have one receiver. So they might do it. I think Trufant is a very, very good corner. I don't think he's on the same level as Norman. But yeah, that's one of the reasons also that I'm not heavy on DeAndre Hopkins this week.
Yeah, as far as the other side of this game, you mentioned Julio Jones, also Freeman, you have to, do you play the wide receiver and running back from the same team, Drew? Another kind of question mark.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a problem with this offense. Last week, those two combined for 90% of the red zone plays that Atlanta ran were in the direction of Julio Jones or Devonta Freeman. And at those kind of rates, I mean, Freeman had like a 90+% market share of carries, over a 14% market share of targets. He was just so heavily involved. So as long as Tevin Coleman's out, I think Freeman's very safe in terms of the bulk workload of carries. I had some question marks about his talent that led to me under-owning him significantly last week, but he ran exceptionally well and was really, really good against Dallas. So the price point hasn't moved too much. I'm still on him. And then Julio, to me, is like the top overall skill position player this week. You just can't compete with that volume right now. He's averaging almost over 15 targets a game in his career. In games he's averaged over 10 targets. He's averaged 8 catches for like 120 yards and 0.7 touchdowns. So like when he's getting this kind of volume, he's just unstoppable. And I'm not too concerned about Jonathan Joseph because they move Julio around so much, and Julio's been able to take on some pretty good corners and produce early in the season anyway.
Yeah, and they're looking to get him the ball just in all spots possible. So as far as like if someone's covering him, that is a good corner, they're going to run these little short routes and try to get him some room to run. But Andrew, you also have the option when taking a wide receiver running back combo like this, like if there is pass interference in the end zone on Julio, which there might be, you get Devonta Freeman with a chance to just run it in and still get those 6 points.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with playing a running back and a receiver from the same team as long as it's a head-to-head or 50-50 game. If you start looking at even triple ups or certainly tournaments, you don't really want to do it. Sometimes it pays off the guy maker that you had Freeman and Julio. But generally, you're going to be capping your upside unless something crazy like what happened last week happens. If there's any reason for concern with Julio, and I don't think there's much, I think he's probably the top play on the board. I'm slightly concerned about the injury stuff just because we know his hamstring's been bothering a little bit. Now they're saying his toe. There's some issue with his toe. And he's a guy that pretty much every year ends up leaving 1 or 2 games early. And I'm just kind of terrified that I'm going to have him on every team and he's going to get banged up. But it's difficult to project that stuff. And, it's just a risk I think you probably have to take with Julio.
Andrew Wiggins, instilling fear into all the hearts of people playing. If you're paying up for Julio, you do not want to hear that even mentioned. That would be terrible. So thank you, Andrew.
To be fair, though, the one game that I think he only left one game early last year, and he had already scored 2 touchdowns in that game, and then he left in the second half. But he can still put up production. even when he leaves early, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. So we'll move on past the Debbie Downer segment of the show into Kansas City at Cincinnati. And Adam, you've got good Andy, bad Andy. Good Andy kind of showed up in the second half last week and also got aided by like a long touchdown pass.
Yeah. I'm tempted to fade Andy in this spot. And I know how bad Kansas City's pass defense has been. They are getting their top corner, Sean Smith, back. So he'll be on the outside with Marcus Peters, which is a lot better than Jamel Fleming, who was just getting absolutely roasted on the outside every week. So I think Sean Smith getting back for them is huge. I mean, this is still a bad secondary. This is still a defense that funnels action towards the pass. I don't know. Like, it just feels like Andy has been running too hot for too long early in the season. My favorite play in this game, I think that is going to go under-owned, is Marvin Jones, who is down to 3,800, has seen his snap count and his target count rise in each of the first 3 weeks. 2 years ago, scored 10 touchdowns despite only playing on 50% of the snaps. I like Marvin Jones, kind of a leverage play against all the ownership that's going to be on A.J. Green.
Yeah. So I think Marvin Jones might be more in play than we think. I feel like he might be a fairly popular play because of A.J. Green being covered and people wanting exposure to this offense, Drew.
My big concern with Marvin Jones is he typically lines up on Sean Smith's side. So if Kansas City isn't going to have Smith assigned to A.J., then he's going to be falling in Sean Smith's coverage. And Smith's a big dude who can kind of match Jones's size. So that's my one concern with Marvin. The skill level and the price point are incredible. 80+% of snaps the last 2 weeks. He's definitely emerged as that second wide receiver target. But Cincinnati has so many good options to throw the ball, and that's why I think Dalton's a little bit safer, just because, if AJ is covered, they've got Marvin Jones. If AJ and Marvin are covered, he's got Tyler Eifert. He's got Gio Bernard to check it down to. There's just so many options that they can find a favorable matchup almost every week. And so I think Dalton at 5,900, I think that is really a mispriced situation for him. There's some other quarterbacks that I think are mispriced as well, so it's not like he's a must play. But I do like that situation. And I like picking on parts of this offense in tournaments, Marvin Jones, A.J. Green, Tyler Eifert, because each and every week, one of those guys, if they get the bulk of the work, can go bonkers. We've seen it with Eifert. We've seen it with A.J. Green. Haven't seen it with Marvin, but he's done that before in the past as well.
Okay, Andrew, as far as the other side of the ball, the Chiefs, like, are you expecting some garbage time production out of them, kind of like last week against the Packers?
Yeah, I mean, the conversation has started with Jamal Charles. The volume's there. He's looked fantastic. It's not a great matchup, but he had a really big game against the Broncos a couple weeks ago in a pretty awful matchup. And when they get to the red zone, it just seems like they hand off to him every single play. And that's how I ended up with 3 touchdowns last week. I probably won't have a ton of them, but there's not much to dislike there, just in the sense that the volume will be there. The other guy I'm looking at is Travis Kelce. He finally got double-digit targets last week. It's like whenever they throw him the ball, he's doing great things with it. And you're kind of scratching your head as to why he was getting 5 or 6 targets the first few weeks and finally got a few more. He caught a 2-point conversion. I think he had maybe like 7 catches for 80 yards or something like that. So a very solid game. And had he found the end zone, it would have been a fantastic game. Maybe this is the week where he gets back on track more towards like what he did week 1. And then, of course, Macklin is in the conversation, but I probably won't have any of him. He had 0 catches, I think, going into halftime, or very close last game. And then he ended, talking about the garbage time, he ended up with like 7 for 120 and a touchdown, but I wouldn't be banking on that.
Yeah, he's the one who profited the most, even more than Charles, I think, from that garbage time, because you knew Charles was going to get the ball regardless. With the thing with Kelce, again, I'm just perplexed by his usage. Like the majority of his targets came in the second half. Also, they did go to him in the red zone and he fumbled, like he bobbled the ball, but he had a good chance if he caught the ball to score on that play. He just did not catch it. Sorry. But I think
David had a little bit of Kelce last week.
What's that?
You can tell David had a little bit of Kelce last week.
Oh, I had Kelsey and Charles. So like that second half was like, yes, yes. And I'm sure like Cobb owners were doing the same thing and James Jones. That game was such a good Monday night game for offense. And if you were fading it, like I think Andrew was,
It was tough.
you just turn it off. Just turn it off. All right. So let's move on to Cleveland at San Diego. And this game, who is anybody on Melvin Gordon? Because I feel like he might be a popular pick this week. Okay,
Yeah.
Drew?
Yeah, of course.
Of course. Okay, well then Adam, I will let you have this then.
Well, I mean, it's like I was on him last week, and which I thought was a good spot, and he screwed me. But I'm not going to miss this week when he has an even better spot where he's at home against the Browns team that funnels action towards the run. I mean, this Browns front is so poor against the run. The concern is that the Chargers' offensive line is a bit banged up. The concern is that Melvin Gordon is not that involved in the pass game or not that involved in the red zone. But it would not surprise me to see a bunch of 20, 30 or longer runs for Melvin Gordon. And I think if he can get 15 to 20 carries in a game that the Chargers should be winning, like he's a reasonable bet to just bust one long like we saw him do so often at Wisconsin. So not going to be on Melvin Gordon in cash after what happened last week, but I think for tournaments, again, he's a really good play. But I don't know, maybe he'll be like 20% owned and I'll look like an idiot again.
I think the concern is what you mentioned is the red zone. Like if he's not going to score, then he needs those long touchdown runs to really hit value. Andrew, I'll go to you as far as your thoughts on this game.
Yeah, I think Melvin Gordon's a pretty good GPP play. Ladarius Green's another. I think he's going to be back this week. He's another one of those tight ends in like the 3K range that I think is a pretty good consideration. As far as the receivers, I mean, Keenan Allen's like up and down. He had two fantastic games with a game in the middle where he had 3 targets and 2 catches or something like that. But I think expect more of the big games from him than the bad ones. He'll be getting some Joe Hayden, so that's not ideal, but it's okay. His price has come up a little. I think he's a fine tournament play. On the other side of the ball, I'm not considering anyone. There'll be no Gary Barnidge this week, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, and to that effect, I think that the Chargers are a decent team to target for your team defense. Drew, I'll let you have your say now on why you love Melvin Gordon this week.
Yeah, and it's really all the things Adam said. I'm debating whether to use him in cash or not. I'm kind of borderline on it. I think it's one of these situations like Adam alluded to with Amari Cooper that, while he hasn't gotten opportunities in the red zone yet, that doesn't mean he's not going to get opportunities in the red zone going forward. And I think the thing that's been hard to evaluate about San Diego's offense is they've played from behind so much during the first 3 weeks that it's really hard to get a gauge of what they do if they were playing from ahead and what they do in the red zone if they were playing from ahead. So just because Melvin Gordon hasn't gotten a red zone look yet, I don't think means he won't get them going forward. And I'm borderline on cash. I'm definitely investing in him in tournaments. I probably will end up moving away in cash just because of that lack of clarity and the lack of involvement in the passing game. But I do think there's the potential, for 100+ yards, 2 touchdowns, and some long runs. I mean, this Cleveland run defense has been shredded by everybody.
Yeah, as far as cash games, like you kind of mentioned, why this kind of feels like Latavius Murray last week, where I'm fading him and he might go off. But unlike Latavius Murray, like we still haven't seen that production in the red zone. But he is in a very hashtag good spot this week. So we'll see. I'm on Ladarius Green if he does play. Obviously, you don't want to mess around with concussions, but the fact that he is practicing in a limited role, we'll see if he continues to do that the next 2 days. Also, the Chargers waive Kyle Miller. Typically, it's good when they waive guys that play your position when they're evaluating if you will play or not. So he is just really cheap on DraftKings this week, and a decent play at the tight end position, especially if Jordan Reed is not going to be playing. All right, next game, Green Bay at San Fran. And Adam, I'm going to just go right to you because you have a hot take for this game.
Yeah, I think the Niners will show up big in this game. I think they have a reasonable chance to win the game outright, but at the very least, keep it close. Teams that win on Monday night in pretty impressive fashion, then have to go on the road next week to a team that pretty much everybody has left for dead. I mean, the Niners and the Bears are like the two laughing stocks of the league right now. The Niners, the butt of every joke. Would not surprise me if the Niners show up really well in this spot. Also should mention no Devontae Adams for the Packers. I think Eddie Lacy's ankle was still giving him trouble as of Monday night. It's not as clear or as golden of a situation as it was on Monday, I don't think. So definitely going to be fading Aaron Rodgers in tournaments. I think he'll be way, way, way highly owned because there's not that many people to spend up for this week. Like the general public is not going to want to spend up for a lot of guys. One guy that they will want to spend up for is Aaron Rodgers. I think pretty easy fade for me in tournaments. The guy that's most interesting, I guess, to me is Ty Montgomery down at 3,000, who we have questions about volume. We have questions about his talent, but I know that he will be on the field for 98% of the snaps or something like that. So that is, for 3,000 at least interesting to me.
Yeah, taking over that wide receiver 3 spot was pretty clear. When he caught that first touchdown was just like people that had Cobb were just going nuts. Cobb or James Jones or Devontae Adams at that time. But Drew, Cobb is like the guy that I feel like I might have the most exposure to this week.
You might Max Dalley it up after he had all the exposure last week?
Yes. 100% Max Dalley had on Randall Cobb last week. Ridiculous. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, I like Cobb a lot. He's my number 2 ranked wide receiver this week after Julio Jones, and he's priced a lot differently than Julio Jones. So I think it's a good opportunity for Cobb. So safe, 35% market share of targets the last 2 weeks. That first week of the season, he was obviously still dealing with that shoulder issue that he suffered in the preseason. You removed Devontae Adams from the equation. And while Ty Montgomery played a lot of snaps last week, both him and Jeff Janis made mistakes, whether it was alignment mistakes, penalties. And so I think there's going to be some time to develop that trust for Aaron Rodgers, which I think further concentrates targets for both Randall Cobb and James Jones. I like both of them this week quite a bit.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to say that hasn't been said. You could maybe consider Kaepernick in tournaments. No one's going to own him. As bad as he was last week where he threw 4 interceptions and 16 attempts, I believe, he still did run for 40 yards on the ground and had a rushing touchdown. So you got to remember he's always got that going. And 2 weeks ago against Pittsburgh, he had a miserable first half, ended up throwing for over 300 yards, a couple touchdowns. He's still got the upside, and it could turn into one of those games that's potentially a shootout if it plays out like Adam thinks it might. Like, there's no way that they're just going to completely show up Green Bay. So if they were to be competitive, I think it'll be a very high-scoring affair. But there's really not a ton else to like on the San Fran side of the ball. The receivers just haven't been reliable at all. And Vernon Davis is Vernon Davis. You could look at Carlos Hyde, actually. He's pretty cheap, and a lot of people were heavy on him a couple weeks ago. There's reason to like him. But you have to assume that he'll be involved in the passing game if they're behind, which seems like he will, but you never know for sure.
Yeah, looks like
Cap has also historically crushed Dom Capers' defenses. And obviously different offenses that they were running before in the past, but Capers' defenses have just never had an answer for Kaepernick.
So he's the anti-Cutler.
Yeah, exactly.
I was waiting for Andrew to give some sort of injury jinx on the Packers wide receivers.
You gotta love the Packers wide receivers. They're priced well, and the volume will be there. And Aaron Rodgers is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of 2 schools of thought for Narrative Street, and we both talked about them. Like, is this going to be a letdown game on the road on a short week, or does Rodgers have his mojo and is momentum on his side for this week? So, Drew, I know which side of Narrative Street you're on for this game.
Yeah, I'm on the side that Aaron Rodgers is just really, really good at football, and no narratives are needed. He's just really good.
No negative grades from you. All right, let's move on. St. Louis at Arizona, divisional game, and we see Arizona just crushing with their offense. And are you expecting another 40-point game, Andrew?
No.
From Chris Johnson. Sorry. From not from Larry Fitzgerald, from Chris Johnson.
Oh, man. I had an okay amount of Chris Johnson 2 weeks ago. So it's always that, it plays out that way where they end up going off the week after you have the exposure. Of course, I had 0 of them last week. Man, their offense sure looks good. One thing is Carson Palmer's had a lot of time, and he really thrives. I think it could be a different situation this week. St. Louis has been good about putting pressure on the quarterback, so that might hurt them. But their team total is still pretty healthy at 25. Larry Fitzgerald looks like he's a rookie out there, man. I don't know if he went to Germany in the offseason or what, but he sure looks spry. And Andre Ellington might be back this week, so that could throw a wrinkle in the running game. Although Arians is talking like he still wants to give Chris Johnson the ball a lot. I won't be on him this week, but that means he'll probably go off again. I'm really interested to see how this game plays out, both from just the actual game and the ownership. I think Larry Fitzgerald's going to be really heavily owned, and maybe this is a week that it's a bit of a letdown, but man almighty, has he been good. So I'm sure I'll have some of them.
I like how Andrew referenced the Germany take. And that's a Kobe Bryant. Like, he can't keep NBA out of his NFL analysis. He thinks
my Twitter feed's starting to fill up with NBA stuff. I'm getting really excited.
That was the ortho keen, right? Where they actually extract your blood out, they spin it, fill it full of protein, and put it back inside your knee. So that's Andrew's hot take for Larry Fitzgerald this season. But he has looked great. Drew had another hot take narrative streak with the getting him the ball with it being the end of the season. Drew, are you still – I mean, that was a surprise because you are anti-narrative.
I am.
That was definitely a narrative.
I am, but I don't know. It felt like that last week, that kind of garbage touchdown. It felt like they were kind of taking care of each other. I don't know. I like Fitzgerald this week, and I feel a little bit dirty about it because I hate investing in players that keep the price keeps moving up as their performance keeps improving. But I think it's another good matchup. Andrew mentioned that St. Louis generates a lot of pressure, and I think with St. Louis generating more pressure, that means more quick-hitting routes, and I think that's more of Fitzgerald's game, kind of closer to the line of scrimmage, working the intermediate routes. I do like John Brown in tournaments just because he keeps getting those deep shots. He's been drawing pass interferences. He dropped a long touchdown last week. So if they can keep a clean pocket, I think they'll take some shots down the field with John Brown. But I think Fitzgerald's the safest play from this game overall. Yes, the price tag's risen, but the performance has been deserving of it. And I think he's still in a pretty good spot. And I like Arizona's defense here as well. St. Louis has been forced to throw the ball a lot early in the season because they haven't had Todd Gurley, haven't had Trey Mason. I think game flow will probably keep them in that situation again this week, and Nick Foles isn't the most accurate quarterback, and St. Louis's offensive line is giving up pressures on 40% of Nick Foles' dropbacks. So I think it's a good spot for Arizona's defense as well.
Yeah, we're moving past the St. Louis offense before anyone recommends Jared Cook or Nick Foles for this week. Both those guys let down a lot of people last week who thought that they would produce. As far as the next game, you've got Minnesota at Denver, and there's some running back implications in this game, Adam.
Yeah, I don't know if people are going to be on Adrian Peterson or not. Like, I don't know if it's hit the public consciousness that Denver has a truly elite defense. I don't like Adrian Peterson in this spot. I don't really want to play any Vikings on the road against a team that is so dominant at the corner position and at the outside linebacker position and up the middle too. The Broncos defense is like a all-pro team. So I think their defense is definitely in play. The CJ Anderson thing, I don't know what to really make of that. I think Ronnie Hillman has flat out outplayed him for so long now, like a couple months now, that we have to assume Ronnie Hillman is going to mix in even if CJ Anderson is 100%, which I'm not sure that he is. So while I think that Broncos will have a lot of success running the ball against Minnesota, I can't say for sure which one it will be. If I'm going to wide out with Denver and with them playing faster, I think the wideouts are definitely back in play for now until it becomes winter and Peyton Manning's arm falls off again. But for now, I would rather play Emmanuel Sanders in this spot over Demaryius Thomas just because we expect Xavier Rhodes to be the one that's on Demaryius Thomas this week.
Drew, your thoughts about this matchup from the Denver side?
Yeah, I want to like CJ Anderson because he made me so much money in the second half of last season, and I was really high on him coming into this season. And I love this matchup because I do think Minnesota is a team that you can run on, especially with a power running game. The concern from CJ Anderson from a fantasy perspective is the the Denver running backs aren't involved in the pass game at all anymore. So even if CJ Anderson has a big game running the ball, if he's effective running the ball and he gets rushing touchdowns, the 0 in the receptions category really limits his upside. And his price has fallen some, but it hasn't fallen all the way down to where his production would suggest it has. So I'm having a hard time. Like, I want to like him in tournaments, but I can't justify the upside at the current price tag. I like Demaryius a little bit more than Manny, but that might be just a talent bias for me that I've always liked Demaryius so much more than Manny. I understand Xavier Rhodes is a pretty good cornerback, but I do think that's the more attackable way to get DFS value from this. I think it's going to be a slow game because I think Minnesota is going to struggle to run the ball. I think Denver is going to work on their running game a lot, and I think it's going to be a good opportunity for Denver's defense to have another solid fantasy performance.
Andrew, are you going to be exposed to this game at all?
Probably not a ton, but we talk a lot about team totals, and some of it's relative based on the week. And you look at this week, and the two highest teams are the Packers and and Indy at 28 points. Sometimes you're going to see teams in the 30s. Like last week, New England was up to 31. So when you have those super high scoring teams, and then maybe you gravitate more towards those. Like Seattle was up at 30 last week. So when you're looking at a team like the Broncos at 25, they're actually not that far off what the highest projected team is this week. So and you know that the ownership is not going to be there on Peyton. He's quietly put up 2 pretty productive games from a fantasy standpoint the last 2 weeks. And really he can go off at any time. They're back at home. So I do like considering Peyton with Demaryius or Manny, or potentially, I don't know if Peyton's still got the upside to throw on the double stack. Obviously, in the years past, there were many times that he threw multiple receivers to multiple guys, or multiple touchdowns to multiple guys in the same game. But I do always like looking at Peyton for tournaments. So I think that is a consideration. And then, of course, the Broncos D is really, really good. And they're at home, and Minnesota's team total is 18. So you have to be considering them as well.
I had a dream last night that I was hanging out with Peyton Manning. And the reason why I had this dream is because I read that article, I think it was in Yahoo, about how it took him 15 minutes to take off his pads. And like, did you guys read that? Like how, like it went in detail about like after a game, like how old and banged up he is.
That sounds like one of those Gronk erotica novels. 15 minutes to take off all his pads. Is that what you were reading, David?
Nope.
Okay.
No, it was like the opposite. But we were talking about like how banged up he was. And so I don't know if people interpret dreams, but interpret that how you may.
I know a guy who interprets dreams, so I'm going to have him work on that one for you.
All right. We've got a few more games. Dallas at New Orleans. And am I dreaming, Adam? Is this New Orleans offense like with Vegas, with Drew Brees back at the helm, like can they produce at all?
This Dallas defense, man. I wanted to play Devontae Freeman more last week, and I didn't because I was scared of the Dallas defense. So now they've, bent me every which way. Like I was, tried to attack them, and they stepped up and played huge, and then I tried to avoid them, and they let Devontae Freeman go completely ham. I don't really have any plays in this game. I was super low on Brees when he was healthy. Now that he's not healthy, I'm really low on him. I think Marcus Colston is done. I think Brandon Cooks is kind of being exposed a bit as a guy who is more of a complimentary player than a featured wide out. So I don't really have anybody I want to play in this game as a whole.
Yeah, this is one of those games. Are people going to be on Dunbar, you think, Andrew?
I saw some interesting news yesterday that Christine Michael is running with the first team. So I don't know what to make of that. Probably not a lot. But that whole situation is just a little iffy. And like Randall obviously had a monster game, and then they were behind, and he didn't even touch the ball really in the second half. So that's just the problem you're getting with playing any of the running backs there. The one guy on the other side that wasn't just mentioned is Ingram, who I think could be interesting. Obviously, Freeman just had a huge game last week, and now you've got Brees coming back a little bit banged up, and they came into the season saying they were going to rely on the run more. Maybe this is a week where Ingram gets in the end zone a couple times.
Drew, clean up on this.
Yeah, I like Ingram in tournaments. He's shown the ability to consistently catch the ball the first 3 weeks, and I know he's splitting snaps with Kerry Robinson and CJ Splitter when he's healthy. But, I mean, he's got, I think it's at least 3 receptions in each of the first 3 games. That's helpful to his fantasy stock, and I think he's going to go really low owned, and so I think it's a good opportunity for Ingram. I like Jason Witten, but I'm a little bit concerned that our tight end whisperer didn't mention Jason Witten. So I now am feeling a little bit of doubt in my lungs when I try to get the words Jason Witten out. But New Orleans has been beat by tight ends pretty consistently all season long, and with Weeden in the quarterback spot, that's a lot of check downs and passes over the middle. It's not a lot of attempts down the field. So I think Witten's a pretty safe cash game play on a PPR site like DraftKings.
It's also just not a lot of attempts, period. I think they can, granted, Witten's a tight end, but the wide receivers, I think they only completed 4 passes last week to wide receivers. And the problem for me with Witten is that his price hasn't really come down at all. He's 4,400. And we've mentioned a bunch of guys around 3 to 3.5 that I think are probably better placed straight up than Witten, and you're getting that discount. So
I've been trying to differentiate Witten, Jordan Reed, and Martellus Bennett like all week long. And the weather situation on Reed is like he was the guy I liked most, so he's kind of pulled back into the pack with those 2, and now I'm still trying to sort through those 3.
Yeah, there was some – I mean, Cutler did practice yesterday. I don't think there's much of a chance he plays, but if he did, I'm kind of hoping he does, because then Bennett really emerges as the standout play, and I think it helps Forte a lot too. But unfortunately, I think it's going to be Clausen under center this week.
Yeah, and for those reasons, Drew, you were talking about, for me – that's why I would rather go with Kelsey or Olsen, because I just feel like they are safer and there's not any options. This game is going to be like an absolute snooze fest though on a Sunday night. So if you pick like 1 week out of the year to just tell your wife, I'm here with you tonight, baby. This is the week that you pull that card that, hey, who cares about football tonight?
Let's watch some Family Feud episodes.
Let's watch what you want to watch, and then just bring it up for the remainder of the Sunday night games. Hey, remember that one time I let you that's what this game is good for. As far
I haven't seen any ads for Once Upon a Time yet, but usually that's what my wife's watching on Sunday nights. It's literally the worst show. They weave all these fairy tales together. They just throw in Captain Hook and Peter Pan. Whoever, the people from Frozen, it's literally the worst show. Thinking about it, so thanks for bringing that to my consciousness.
Yeah. You might want to take something before that. As far as the Monday night game, Detroit and Seattle. Adam, what's up with the running back situation for Seattle? That's kind of what people are trying to figure out.
Yeah, Adam Schefter, one of the most reliable reporters out there, came out yesterday and said Marshawn Lynch is 50-50 to play Monday night. He came into last week with a calf issue, didn't start the game due to a back issue, left the game with a hamstring issue, is 29 years old, has had over 1,100 carries in the last 4 years. If this is the end for Marshawn Lynch, I feel like this is kind of what it looks like. If I was Seattle, I would hold him out of this spot for sure. I think that Thomas Rawls is people are saying, oh, he's an undrafted free agent. I know a lot of the draft community was real high on Thomas Rawls coming out. He was a priority free agent that they scooped up quickly, let Christine Michael go and kept Thomas Rawls on the roster. And if Marshawn Lynch is ruled out early, I mean, Thomas Rawls at 3,000 against the Lions defense that was elite against the run this year, but looks bad against the run now without Sue, without Fairley, without DeAndre Levy, who's hurt. It would be a really nice spot to use Thomas Rawls if we get word that Marshawn Lynch will definitely sit.
Yeah. Drew, your thoughts as far as Jimmy Graham in this game?
Yeah, I'm still having a hard time with Jimmy Graham just with the volume of targets and the current price point. So I like him in tournaments, but I'm still struggling to invest in cash games until we start seeing something more than like 5 targets a week. I just think you're relying too much on efficiency at those levels. The Rawls situation, I'm interested to watch this week because last week I thought was an easy situation where they didn't have to use Marshawn. They didn't have to use Fred Jackson because they were playing from ahead the whole time. They were kind of grinding things out. And maybe that'll be the same way against Detroit, who hasn't been very good early in the season. But I do think that if they are in a tighter game, I think there's more opportunity for those snaps to be split. Not necessarily that Fred Jackson's going to lead the team in snaps, but that Fred Jackson would play more in kind of passing situations and different things like that. I think last week could be a little bit misleading just because the game was never really in doubt at all. And maybe this week will be the same. I do like Seattle's defense a lot. I think they'll be under-owned because they're so expensive and there's so many good defenses that are cheaper. And Matthew Stafford's been very inaccurate. They're giving up, again, over 40% of his dropbacks are pressures. And Seattle's front four is very good at pressuring the quarterback. At home, you've got Tyler Lockett, a good return game. I think Seattle's defense is probably going to be a good tournament play as well.
Yeah, and speaking of tournament plays, I was reading an article by Anthony Amico. He was talking about a little bit of strategy, which I thought was really good. He said, if there's no news yet on Lynch by your Sunday morning, Sunday evening contest, you can throw in Thomas Rawls, and then if Lynch does play, you can switch that to Theo Riddick, which is also 3K. It's a guy that actually Peter was talking about on the Sunday night show, had exposure in that Sunday Monday game. And he has put together a pretty good season for an 0-3 Lions team. So it's clear, though, Andrew, that like Joique Bell is like not in the picture at all.
Well, I mean, they're still giving him touches, but he's got 20 carries on the season. He looks like he's toast, but they've been behind in like every game, and bringing Theo in the up offense. He's been playing the fourth quarter. You'd like to give Amir more touches, but it just hasn't been there so far. I'm not going to be touching the Detroit offense at all. The one guy that we haven't mentioned is Wilson, and I don't know. He's interesting. Like, he's always got the upside if he starts running. Frankly, the Seattle offense just has not looked good this year, so I'm a little bit concerned overall. Like, at halftime against the Bears at home, they had 6 points. They just weren't moving the ball. I don't think that'll continue the whole season, but I just don't know. The line isn't very good. The defense, like Drew said, is probably going to go under own, and Stafford sure has looked bad. He's seeing ghosts and making a lot of mistakes, and I mean, there's no reason to think that won't continue this week at Seattle. Those are kind of the tournament plays I'm looking at, but as far as a cash game perspective, there's probably no one that I would consider from this game. So it's going to be another Monday night sweat show where I'm just praying for 0-0, which I don't know. It sucks. It's not very fun, like waiting for Monday night to roll around and your dreams to be crushed. But I think overall this game will be pretty low drafted.
Yeah, and this is next to that Jacksonville game. This is probably the biggest favorite as far as Seattle. So Seattle's defense is going to be another probably solid play from this. And other than that, we just don't know. If news breaks, though, like on this Marshawn Lynch play, I feel like that will definitely diversify. It'll be tough to have it wouldn't be tough, but you would have Rawls and Carlos Williams like in your lineup, and then like where do you spend? So it might diversify some of those Carlos Williams shares if we have any Marshawn Lynch news. The issue is that like there probably won't be any Marshawn Lynch news. Like
I wouldn't expect any news. Like, why would they give us any update on it? And they were so secretive last week.
Exactly.
It's like in hindsight, it seems, and you could have kind of read the tea leaves in the sense it was a 14-point spread. Like, why would they be pushing Lynch when they clearly didn't have to? But then there were tweets coming out like they were laughing at the fact that Lynch wouldn't play. So that was a frustrating situation. I ended up playing Lynch in tournaments, but in hindsight, like I probably should have just stayed away completely.
Yeah, and I know that since that game was the late game on Sunday, like the late afternoon game, there were some reports about him not being even in pads on the sideline. Then he was, but by that time, people had already kind of switched to Jamal Charles, which seemed to work in their favor big time. So, yeah, I don't expect anything for Lynch news for this game, but who knows? We'll see. So that will do it for the Week 4 wrap-up or matchup breakdown for DraftKings. Guys, we'll end with this one nugget. What game are you targeting the most? Adam?
What game am I targeting the most? I think that I will have some Ty God. I will have some Carlos, but I think that I'm also going to have some Eli and some Beckham. And in tournaments, Giants defense is the ultimate contrarian play.
Oh yeah, yes it is. Drew.
I think it's less games and more offenses, and I'm targeting Buffalo, Oakland, and Green Bay are the three offenses.
That's not the game we played.
I don't care. I don't care.
I was going to answer the question in the same way with in fact the same answers, except you could throw Atlanta in there too. Because I don't know, I don't see a lot of like games where there's real shootout potential where I want to be on both sides. It's more like some of these offenses are just going to beat down on the other side.
Yes. Indy too.
This might be Indy's week.
Okay.
It could be.
Next week,
Andrew Luck can get himself outside or inside the top 30 in accuracy rates.
Next week, I'm just going to ask offense. I'm not even going to do games because you guys do not follow the rules. If I'm picking one game, though, I think it's that KC at Cincinnati game for games. So
little game stack.
What's that?
Little game stack.
Little game stack there. So. All right, that will do it.
I do want you to know, David, I do think Andrew Luck outscores Mariota this week. I want to be on record. Team Luck this week over Mariota. Long term, I'm still on Team Mariota.
If
Andrew Luck does not outscore Mariota this week, like Peter will be in hiding for that Sunday night show. Like Peter will not even be there.
Mariota's hanging out like Jerry is and Adam's couch right now.
Yeah. Drew already has hedged his bets though for this upcoming Sunday night by saying Luck only does well against the AFC South. So even if Luck goes for like 304 touchdowns, Peter will Drew has already given himself an out for that conversation on Sunday night. But yeah, we will be hanging out Sunday night, and then we'll also be Monday for the live sweat show. Make sure you're tuning in to DKTV then. I'm Socrdave, David Kitchen, on behalf of the rest of the DraftKings analysts. We'll see you later, and good luck this week.